Hi everyone and welcome back. I have an Abus ADTI 50 padlock here. It's a 6-pinner. There's the key. Some lows at the back. There, that's better. Highs and lows at the front. Key works. Love that shackle pop. Listen to that. That's sweet. This padlock is a really interesting one. I really like picking these padlocks. I didn't always though. In the beginning, I had about 8 of these padlocks, and a few of them I could open consistently. The rest shut me out forever. It was really frustrating. I think it was before I found the jiggle test, which finding the jiggle test, just the concept of it, really was a game changer for me. But these locks, they pick a little different. Something about them, I can't put my finger on it. It's an aluminum body, and I think the plug is aluminum too. Or what do they call it? Titalium. Yeah, the plug is not. It's not steel or anything. I don't think it's brass. Anyway, might be getting a little out of my depth here, but I think it's, maybe it is brass. I kind of feel like it's brass. Anyway, but the Bible is aluminum, and the pins kind of feel a little different than your typical brass padlock. It's a little bit smoother. The spools in here are a little less forgiving. They like to drop. Oversets are super easy. What else? I can't remember if the key pins, if any of them are torpedoes. I don't think so. But we're about to find out, because this one I gutted. I think this was actually the first padlock that I ever grubbed. And I put the pics on lpubeltapp.com so you can see what's in here in those pictures. This is that lock. So let's get it picked and then we'll gut it and see what's inside. Again, one of my favorite padlocks. They're just so difficult in the beginning, and so I think for a lot of people, and once you get it, very rewarding. All right, down to business. Number 1 is binding. Oh, I'm using a 1mm pry bar to tension, and at the beginning when I first started picking, I only had Sparrow's hooks, so 25 thousandths and 15 thousandths. So I kind of got in the habit of using a 15 thousandths. This is a high reach in many of the locks that I was picking at the beginning, because that was the only thin pick I had. 20 thousandths would have been great. I'm not even sure if 20 thousandths hooks were around at that time. Not that it was a long time ago, but I feel like 19 thousandths, like between 18 and 20 thousandths is a little more common these days. Anyway, enough yammering. But yeah, I really like the 15 thousandths high reach for a lot of these padlocks. Okay, 1 is binding. Light tension. Doesn't take much. There are 1 springy, 2 springy, 3 springy, 4 springy, 5 is binding. A little counter rotation. Got that. False set. 6 is springy. Back to 1. Springy. 2 is binding. Got a little plug movement there. Still binding though. I think it's a spool. Yeah, counter rotation. Is it? Went springy on me. Let's move on. 3 is binding. Counter rotation. I heard some pins drop. 4 is springy. 5 is binding. Got that. Springy. 6 is springy. Back to 1. Springy. 2 is binding again. Just gave it a nudge and dropped into a false set. So I'm thinking that 2 is an early binder, and it's also a spool. I'm going to give it some more lift. See if we, yeah, getting some counter rotation. Got that, dropped a few. Three springy, 4 springy, 5 is binding again. Heard some drops and a false set. 6 is springy, back to 1, springy, 2 is springy, 3 springy, 4 is binding. Counter rotation, false set, heard some drops, 5 is binding. Oh, and it's open. There we go. So drops. These locks are manufactured pretty well. The tolerances are pretty decent. Some of the spools, when the midsection is crossing the shear line at rest, I should add, they don't bind. They won't bind until later on, but if the shoulders of those spools are wider than others, or larger diameter, once they finally bind and you go to pick them, they'll cause everything else you just set to drop. So you get into this like whack-a-mole pattern. Yeah, see, this was one of my early gutting locks. I mangled the spring. Still works though. Let's put that there. Yeah, so the spool's there. So if you find that you have a spool that's, so number 1 is a lightly serrated standard. If you find that you have a spool that's causing others to drop consistently, set that spool early, even if it's not binding, because it needs to be set early. That'll save you the headache of that merry-go-round, that whack-a-mole pattern of setting and dropping pins. I figured that concept out by picking these locks. These locks taught me all about that. And again, it's one of those things that once you figure it out, it's a bit of a game changer for you. Was for me. The 80 Ti's, here's a spool. You see that? They're not very deep, but they do catch. They've got some nice crisp shoulders on them. Standard keep-in. Yeah, these locks at the beginning, I think I started picking them before I really should have. I think I bit off more than I could chew. And at one point I got so frustrated that I almost gave up lock sport. I just kind of felt like, well, I'm not getting it. I guess this isn't for me. But for whatever reason, I stuck with it and I figured things out, and I'm glad I did. Another spool in 3. What else about this lock? I do recall seeing frequently, well, I don't know, relatively frequently, people will comment saying that the pins are aluminum. That may be the case in, I think it's the 64 Ti has aluminum pins. The 80 Ti, they're not aluminum. They are magnetic. Now, They're not as magnetic as you would expect from steel pins, so I'm not going to say that they're steel. Maybe they're coated with something. They're quite light. But here, let's grab some magnets here. There. See, so that's steel, strongly magnetic. It sticks, but it's a bit weak. So to be fair, I don't know what's in it. I haven't taken a file or anything to one of these pins to sacrifice it, but maybe one day. Here we go. Another spool. Got some crud on it. What's this? Oh, there's still shavings in there from when I drilled it out. That's 4, another spool in 4. So I went so far as to pull the retaining pin for the plug in this lock, just to see what was going on inside. There's really nothing worth mentioning, so I'm not going to go that far this time because I never really did. I never finished the job. I didn't put a grub screw in that position right there. I just shoved the plug back in. But there's really, I don't think there's anything special about the plug. There's no passive pins or anything like that that would, make pulling the plug out of any value. Another spool in 5. And 6. All steel springs. And there we go. It's a minimum lift in number 6. That's a spool. You can see long key pin that matches up with that shallow cut. It does need a little bump, but that's about it. What else? There's not much to say, really. You can see on the key, relative to this largest warding here, you can see that low 6 pin is just above this warding cut. So if we're looking inside, if we're looking inside the lock, you can see there how the key aligns to that warding, and you can get a sense of how high those pins need to be lifted. The high ones, especially number 1. I had a few of these where number 1 was a high lift or a max lift. And with TOK, you got the tensioner in there. And especially if you're using a thin hook and you're picking off the bottom, it needs to go pretty high to set. Like, you'll have a pretty extreme pick angle. And don't be afraid of that. If you feel like these things give very clear feedback, it's just a matter of learning what that feedback is. And again, I think I had bitten off more than I could chew back in the day there. But very quickly, I think at one point I had 8 of them and it was down to 1. There was one lock that just wouldn't open for me. And I can't remember what it was, how I got over that hump. But I did. Anyway, my mind's kind of wandering. The Avis 80 Ti 50. Let's get a little close up here. So yeah, no torpedo key pins. I must be thinking of another lock. 2 through 6 are spools. 1 is a serrated standard, lightly serrated. So you will get a click or 2 out of it, depending on the bitting. But that's no big deal really. So generally, the standard is always in position 1, as far as I know. So that's something that might be helpful. Of course, picking one, it'll bind right off the bat. You set it, you get a false set. Don't be afraid to let pins drop in this lock and any other lock. If it's okay if you're getting pins dropping. It just means that there might be a true binding order issue where you're going to have to figure out which one of those spools is the biggest and how it's sitting, and maybe it needs to be lifted early on rather than later when it actually binds. They can be tricky, but they're not impossible. So jiggle test like it's your job. Pay attention to the feedback, slow down, be mindful, and you'll get it. Anyway, I think that's all I've got. The 80 Ti-50 picked and gutted. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.